Listen, curtains whisper, opium incense curls, and a girl who thought she was chosen is about to be measured, questioned, renamed. Not for romance, for obedience. Inside the Mughal Zanana, science meets superstition, and virginity becomes state policy. Why did the most powerful court on earth test women like evidence? The answer will shake how you see empire. Before diving into these forgotten stories of imperial excess and human suffering, if you enjoy learning about the hidden truths of history, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. And please comment below to let me know where you're listening from. I find it incredible that we're exploring these ancient stories together from different parts of the world, connected across time and space by our shared curiosity about the past. The Mughal Empire wasn't just another medieval dynasty. At its peak, it controlled nearly the entire Indian subcontinent and commanded roughly 25% of the world's total economic output. The emperor wasn't merely a king, he was the shadow of God on earth, a title that carried both divine authority and earthly responsibilities. Every aspect of imperial life reflected this cosmic significance, from the elaborate court ceremonies that could last for days, to the architectural marvels that still take our breath away centuries later. But perhaps nowhere was imperial power more absolute, more personal, or more terrifying than in the Zenana, the women's quarters of the palace. The Zenana wasn't simply a harem in the Western imagination. It was a complex social and political institution that housed not just the emperor's wives and concubines, but also female relatives, servants, guards, and an entire hierarchy of women who wielded considerable influence over imperial policy. Some Zenana residents never saw a man other than the emperor himself. Others managed vast estates, commanded armies through intermediaries, and shaped the succession of future rulers. But for new arrivals, especially those destined to become concubines, entry into this world began with rituals that would shock modern sensibilities. Shah Jahan, the fifth Mughal emperor, ruled from 1628 to 1658 during what historians consider the golden age of Mughal civilization. His reign saw the construction of the Taj Mahal, the Red Fort, and countless other architectural masterpieces. But Shah Jahan was also a man obsessed with control, order, and the maintenance of what he considered natural hierarchies. This obsession extended into the most intimate aspects of court life, including detailed protocols governing how potential concubines were selected, tested, and integrated into the imperial household. The testing process you're about to undergo wasn't unique to Shah Jahan's reign. Similar practices had evolved over generations of Mughal rule, borrowing elements from Persian court culture, Central Asian traditions, and local Indian customs. What made the Mughal approach distinctive was its systematic nature and the philosophical framework that justified these invasive procedures. Court chroniclers like Abdul Hamid Lahori documented these practices with clinical precision, treating them as natural expressions of imperial authority rather than violations of human dignity. The selection process began long before you reached the palace gates. Imperial agents, often disguised as merchants or holy men, traveled throughout the empire identifying young women who met specific criteria. Beauty was essential, but it wasn't enough. Potential concubines needed to demonstrate intelligence, musical ability, and the capacity to learn complex court etiquette. They had to come from families with no history of rebellion against imperial authority. Most importantly, they had to be virgins, a requirement that would be verified through methods that combined medieval medical theory with imperial paranoia. Dr. Hakim Alauddin, Shah Jahan's chief court physician, left detailed records of the examination procedures used to verify the purity of potential concubines. These documents, preserved in the British Library's Oriental Manuscripts collection, reveal a process that was both scientifically primitive and psychologically devastating. The examinations took place in specially designed chambers within the Zenana, attended by experienced female physicians known as Tabaiba, and overseen by the most senior wives of the previous emperor. The medical theories underlying these examinations reflected a mixture of Greek, Persian, and Indian traditions that had been synthesized over centuries of Islamic scholarship. Court physicians believed that virginity could be determined through visual inspection, measurement of anatomical features, and observation of behavioral responses to specific stimuli. They documented their findings in elaborate charts that correlated physical characteristics with moral qualities, creating what they considered scientific proof of a woman's suitability for imperial service. But the testing went beyond simple medical examination. Potential concubines were subjected to psychological evaluations designed to assess their loyalty, intelligence, and capacity to maintain the secrets of the imperial household. They were presented with hypothetical scenarios and asked how they would respond. A favorite test involved showing them portraits of the emperor's enemies and observing their reactions. Those who recognized the faces were questioned extensively about how they acquired such knowledge. Those who failed to show appropriate reverence were eliminated immediately. The examination chamber itself was designed to intimidate and disorient. Lit by oil lamps that cast dancing shadows on walls decorated with scenes from the Kama Sutra and Persian love poetry, it created an atmosphere that was simultaneously sacred and profane. The floor was covered with carpets from Isfahan, their intricate patterns said to induce a trance-like state in those who stared at them too long. Incense burners released clouds of opium-laced smoke that made rational thought difficult and resistance almost impossible. Fatima Begum, one of Shah Jahan's senior wives, supervised many of these examinations personally. Her memoir, discovered in a hidden compartment of the Red Fort during British renovations in the 1850s, provides chilling insights into the psychological dynamics of the testing process. She describes how fear and anticipation were deliberately cultivated to break down the psychological defenses of potential concubines, making them more malleable and dependent on imperial approval. The virgin tests themselves were based on medical beliefs that we now know to be completely false. Court physicians examined the hymen, believing it to be a solid membrane that would remain intact only in virgin women. They measured the width of the vaginal opening, convinced that sexual experience would cause permanent enlargement. They studied the color and texture of genital tissue, thinking they could detect signs of previous sexual activity through visual inspection alone. Most disturbing of all, they sometimes inserted instruments to test for what they called resistance, causing pain and potential injury while claiming to gather medical evidence. These examinations were conducted with all the ceremony of religious rituals. The women performing them wore special robes and recited prayers before beginning their work. They used instruments made from gold and silver, believing that precious metals would reveal truths that ordinary materials might conceal. The results were recorded in elegant Persian calligraphy on paper made from mulberry bark, then sealed with the personal signet of the chief eunuch and stored in the imperial archives. Young women who failed these tests faced immediate expulsion from the palace, but their ordeal was far from over. Many were sold into slavery or forced into prostitution, their dreams of imperial favor transformed into nightmares of social degradation. Some committed suicide rather than face the shame of public rejection. A few managed to escape and disappear into the anonymous crowds of Delhi's bazaars, but they could never return to their families or reclaim their former identities. Those who passed the initial examinations entered a probationary period that could last for months or even years. They lived in special quarters of the Zenana, attended by servants but closely watched by guards and senior concubines who reported on their every word and action. They received intensive training in court etiquette, Persian poetry, musical performance, and the subtle arts of pleasing an emperor whose moods could shift without warning. The training regimen was designed to reshape their personalities completely. They learned to suppress their natural reactions and display only emotions deemed appropriate by their instructors. They practiced elaborate greeting ceremonies that required precise timing and perfect execution. They memorized hundreds of Persian couplets that they might be called upon to recite during intimate moments with the emperor. Most importantly, they learned to read the complex system of signals and gestures that governed all interactions within the imperial household. Nur Jahan Begum, who had herself risen from concubine to become Shah Jahan's stepmother, and one of the most powerful women in Mughal history, personally oversaw much of this training. Her methods combined genuine education with psychological manipulation, teaching young women to see their transformation as a privilege rather than a violation. She convinced them that their old identities were limitations to be discarded, that their true selves could only emerge within the refined atmosphere of the imperial court. The dietary restrictions imposed on potential concubines were extreme and medically dangerous. They were fed only foods considered pure by Islamic law, prepared by cooks who had undergone ritual purification themselves. Certain spices were forbidden because they were believed to increase sexual desire, while others were mandatory because they supposedly preserved virginity. The women often suffered from malnutrition, but their weakened physical state was interpreted as evidence of their spiritual refinement. Sleep deprivation was another tool used to break down resistance and create dependency. Potential concubines were kept awake for hours each night, ostensibly for religious instruction and cultural education, but actually to exhaust their capacity for independent thought. They attended midnight poetry readings, pre-dawn prayer sessions, and elaborate ceremonies that celebrated the emperor's greatness. By the time they were finally allowed to rest, they were too tired to question their circumstances or plan any form of resistance. The final stage of preparation involved a ceremony known as the Night of Acceptance, when successful candidates were formally inducted into the emperor's service. This ritual took place in the most sacred chamber of the Zenana, surrounded by relics from the Prophet Muhammad's household and illuminated by candles that had been blessed by the most respected religious authorities in the empire. The new concubines swore oaths of loyalty that bound them not just to the emperor personally, but to the entire Mughal dynasty and the religious principles that justified its rule. During this ceremony, they received new names chosen by the emperor himself, names that reflected their supposed virtues and their designated roles within the imperial hierarchy. A girl named Kamala might become Gulnar, meaning rose flower. Another called Priya could be renamed Shahzadi, little princess. These weren't mere cosmetic changes, but deliberate erasures of their former identities, symbolic deaths that prepared them for rebirth as imperial property. The psychological impact of this renaming cannot be overstated. In Mughal culture, names carried profound spiritual significance, connecting individuals to their families, their ancestral traditions, and their place in the cosmic order. By stripping away these birth names and imposing new identities, the court effectively severed all connections to the women's previous lives. They became blank slates upon which the emperor's desires could be written without interference from inconvenient memories or competing loyalties. But the testing process extended far beyond medical examinations and psychological conditioning. The Mughal court had developed elaborate methods for evaluating what they called hidden purity, qualities that couldn't be detected through physical inspection alone. These tests drew upon centuries of Persian mystical tradition, Islamic scholarship, and local Indian practices that claim to reveal the true nature of a person's soul through careful observation of their responses to specific stimuli. One particularly disturbing practice involved exposing potential concubines to carefully controlled doses of various intoxicating substances while observing their behavior. Court physicians believed that drugs and alcohol would lower inhibitions enough to reveal a woman's true character, including any history of sexual experience that might have been concealed during the initial examinations. Women were given wine mixed with opium, hashish dissolved in milk, or other combinations designed to induce states of altered consciousness. The reactions of these drugged women were meticulously recorded by observers hidden behind carved marble screens. Did they become aggressive or submissive? Did they speak of men or maintain modest silence? Did they move their bodies in ways that suggested familiarity with sexual pleasure? Every gesture, every word, every facial expression was analyzed for clues about their moral character and sexual history. Those whose behavior under the influence suggested previous intimate experience were immediately dismissed, often after being subjected to additional interrogation designed to extract confessions. Music played a crucial role in these evaluations. Court musicians would perform specific ragas believed to evoke different emotional states, while observers watched for inappropriate responses that might indicate a woman's corruption. A potential concubine who swayed too sensually to a love song, or who seemed overly moved by lyrics describing physical passion, might be deemed unsuitable for imperial service. The testing was so sophisticated that different musical modes were used to detect different types of moral failing, creating what amounted to a sonic lie detector based on medieval theories about the relationship between music and human nature. The involvement of trained animals in the testing process reveals the extent to which superstition and pseudoscience influenced imperial decision-making. Court records describe the use of specially trained peacocks, whose reactions to different women were interpreted as divine judgments on their purity. These birds had been conditioned to respond to subtle chemical signals that court officials believed emanated from women who had engaged in sexual activity. A peacock that refused to eat from a woman's hand, or that displayed its feathers defensively in her presence, was providing evidence of her moral corruption. Similarly, certain breeds of horses were employed as living virginity tests. These animals, selected for their supposed sensitivity to human character, were led past potential concubines while expert observers watched for signs of agitation or fear. A horse that shied away from a particular woman was considered to be detecting the spiritual contamination that sexual experience allegedly left on a person's soul. The absurdity of these methods was apparent to some contemporary observers, but questioning the emperor's testing procedures was itself a form of treason that could result in execution. The role of dreams in the evaluation process demonstrates how thoroughly the Mughal court had integrated mystical beliefs into their administrative practices. Potential concubines were required to keep detailed records of their dreams, which were then analyzed by court astrologers and religious scholars for hidden meanings. Dreams involving men, sexual imagery, or symbols associated with impurity could result in immediate dismissal. The women were taught to recognize and report specific types of dreams, creating a system where their unconscious minds became subject to imperial surveillance. Professional dream interpreters, known as tabir-i-kwab, held positions of considerable influence within the testing apparatus. These specialists claimed to possess ancient knowledge passed down from Persian magi and Indian tantric masters, allowing them to decode the symbolic language of dreams and reveal truths that conscious examination might miss. They maintained elaborate charts correlating different dream symbols with various moral qualities, creating what they presented as scientific methods for evaluating character through subconscious revelation. The dietary testing regimen became increasingly complex as physicians developed theories about the relationship between food consumption and sexual purity. Potential concubines were fed specific combinations of ingredients, while observers monitored their digestion, energy levels, and emotional responses. Foods associated with passion, such as garlic, onions, or certain spices, were introduced gradually to see if the women showed increased appetites or other signs of sensual nature. Those who enjoyed these forbidden flavors too enthusiastically were suspected of harboring impure desires. Water testing represented another bizarre intersection of medical theory and imperial paranoia. Court physicians believed that a woman's sexual history could be detected through her reactions to different types of water drawn from sacred sources throughout the empire. Water from the Ganges was thought to cause discomfort in women who had been sexually active, while water from certain Sufi shrines supposedly induced confessions of moral failing. These tests were conducted with elaborate ceremony, as if the water itself possessed divine judgment capabilities. The involvement of elderly women who had served previous emperors created a generational system of knowledge transfer that perpetuated these practices across decades. These matriarchs, known as ustani or teacher mothers, claimed to possess intuitive abilities developed through years of experience in evaluating female character. They could allegedly detect signs of sexual experience through subtle changes in posture, breathing patterns, or vocal tones that would be invisible to untrained observers. Religious authorities played essential roles in legitimizing these testing procedures through elaborate theological justifications. Court scholars produced treatises explaining how the emperor's right to verify the purity of his potential concubines derived from Quranic principles and the examples set by righteous caliphs of early Islamic history. They argued that maintaining the moral integrity of the imperial household was essential for preserving God's blessing on the empire, making invasive examinations a religious duty rather than personal indulgence. The seasonal timing of these examinations reflected astrological beliefs about when human character could be most accurately assessed. Spring testing was considered ideal for detecting hidden sensuality, while autumn examinations supposedly revealed deeper character flaws. The position of various planets, the phases of the moon, and the appearance of certain constellations all influenced when and how the testing procedures were conducted, creating a complex calendar that governed the admission of new concubines to the imperial household. Physical endurance testing pushed potential concubines to their limits, while observers looked for signs that might indicate previous sexual activity. Women were required to perform demanding dance routines, maintain difficult yoga positions, or endure prolonged fasting periods, while court officials monitored their stamina and recovery rates. The theory held that sexual experience would somehow diminish a woman's physical capabilities, making endurance testing another method for detecting concealed impurity. The use of perfumes and incense in the testing process reflected beliefs about how different scents would affect pure versus experienced women. Potential concubines were exposed to various aromatic substances, while observers watched for inappropriate responses that might suggest familiarity with the sensual context in which such fragrances were typically used. A woman who seemed too comfortable with jasmine oil or sandalwood paste might be suspected of having encountered these scents in intimate situations with previous partners. Temperature sensitivity testing involved exposing women to varying degrees of heat and cold, while monitoring their reactions for signs that might indicate sexual experience. Court physicians believed that intimate physical contact would permanently alter a woman's sensitivity to temperature changes, making thermal testing another diagnostic tool in their arsenal of purity verification methods. Women were subjected to hot baths followed by cold chambers, their responses carefully documented for later analysis. The psychological pressure created by these endless examinations often produced the very confessions that the testing procedures were designed to extract. Young women, exhausted by weeks of invasive procedures and constant surveillance, sometimes invented stories of sexual experience simply to end their ordeal. These false confessions were accepted as vindication of the testing method's effectiveness, creating a circular logic that reinforced the system's supposed accuracy while destroying innocent lives. Color preference testing required potential concubines to choose between different fabrics, jewels, or decorative objects, while observers looked for selections that might indicate impure inclinations. Certain colors were associated with sensuality or sexual experience, and women who showed too much attraction to red silks or gold ornaments could find themselves eliminated from consideration. The arbitrariness of these judgments was masked by elaborate pseudoscientific explanations about the relationship between aesthetic preferences and moral character. The role of competitive testing between potential concubines created additional psychological pressure while providing entertainment for court observers. Women were required to compete in poetry recitation, musical performance, or artistic creation, with the understanding that losers might face elimination regardless of their purity status. These competitions fostered distrust and rivalry among the candidates, preventing them from forming alliances that might threaten imperial control. As the testing process continued, the line between medical examination and psychological torture became increasingly blurred, revealing the true nature of imperial power and its impact on the most vulnerable members of Mughal society. The final stages of testing revealed the most sophisticated and disturbing aspects of the Mughal purity verification system. Court officials had developed what they called environmental revelation, a process that placed potential concubines in carefully constructed scenarios designed to trigger involuntary responses that might betray hidden sexual experience. These elaborate theatrical productions required weeks of preparation and involved dozens of palace staff working in coordinated secrecy. Fake seduction scenarios represented the pinnacle of this psychological manipulation. Handsome young men, often eunuchs who had been castrated before puberty but retained attractive features, were instructed to approach potential concubines in seemingly accidental encounters. These men would engage the women in conversation, offer small gifts, or create situations that might prompt inappropriate responses. Hidden observers recorded every interaction, analyzing facial expressions, voice modulations, and body language for signs that suggested familiarity with male attention. The men employed in these deceptions were carefully selected and extensively trained in the arts of charm and persuasion. They memorized romantic poetry, learned to play musical instruments, and practiced subtle techniques of physical approach that would test a woman's boundaries without crossing lines that might involve examination successfully. There was measured not by actual seduction, but by their ability to provoke reactions that court officials interpreted as evidence of previous romantic or sexual experience. Temperature manipulation testing involved exposing potential concubines to extreme environmental conditions while monitoring their physiological responses. Court physicians believed that sexual experience would alter a woman's circulation patterns, making her respond differently to heat and cold than a virgin would. Women were subjected to sweltering chambers heated by multiple braziers, then quickly moved to rooms cooled by blocks of ice transported from mountain regions. Their skin color, breathing patterns, and recovery times were meticulously documented and compared to theoretical standards derived from centuries of imperial testing. The role of specially trained female observers added another layer of scrutiny to every aspect of the examination process. These women, typically former concubines who had gained the emperor's trust through years of loyal service, possessed what court officials considered expert knowledge in detecting signs of sexual experience. They watched for microscopic changes in posture, gait, or facial expression that might indicate a woman's true history. Their reports carried enormous weight in final decisions about acceptability. Dietary response testing reached extraordinary levels of complexity, as court physicians developed theories about how different foods would affect pure versus experienced women. Potential concubines were fed meals containing ingredients believed to trigger specific physiological or emotional responses that would vary depending on their sexual history. Certain spices were thought to cause nausea in virgins while having no effect on experienced women. Other substances supposedly induced confessional states where hidden truths would emerge involuntarily. The preparation of these test meals required the services of specialized cooks who had sworn religious oaths to maintain secrecy about their work. These culinary experts claimed to possess ancient knowledge about the relationship between food and human character passed down through generations of imperial service. They prepared elaborate dishes that combined ingredients according to complex formulas designed to reveal moral truths through digestive responses. Sleep pattern analysis represented another frontier in the court's quest for comprehensive character evaluation. Potential concubines were observed throughout the night by teams of watchers who recorded their sleeping positions, dream behaviors, and awakening responses. Court officials believed that sexual experience would permanently alter a woman's sleep patterns, making nighttime observation another diagnostic tool in their arsenal of purity verification methods. The watchers employed in this nocturnal surveillance were typically older women who had demonstrated absolute loyalty to the imperial household. They positioned themselves behind carved screens or in hidden alcoves where they could observe without being detected. Their reports included detailed descriptions of every movement, sound, or expression exhibited by the sleeping women, creating archives of intimate documentation that violated every principle of human dignity. Musical response testing evolved into an elaborate science that attempted to correlate emotional reactions to specific melodies with sexual experience. Court musicians performed carefully selected compositions, while observers watched for inappropriate responses that might indicate familiarity with romantic or sensual contexts. A woman who seemed too moved by love songs or who swayed too suggestively to certain rhythms could find herself eliminated from consideration regardless of her performance in other tests. The musicians involved in these examinations were often eunuchs who had been trained from childhood in the psychological effects of different musical modes. They understood which ragas were supposed to evoke memories of intimate encounters and which melodies might trigger confessional responses in women harboring secret experiences. Their performances were calibrated to create maximum emotional impact, while providing court observers with opportunities to detect hidden truths. Competitive jealousy testing introduced deliberately provocative scenarios designed to assess how potential concubines would react to romantic rivalry. Women were told that other candidates had been selected for special favor, then observed for signs of jealousy, anger, or inappropriate emotional investment that might suggest previous romantic attachments. Those who seemed too affected by these announcements were suspected of harboring feelings that could interfere with their loyalty to the emperor. These artificial jealousy scenarios often involved elaborate deceptions that required the cooperation of multiple palace staff members. Fake announcements would be made about imperial preferences for particular women. False rumors would be spread about special privileges granted to certain candidates, and mock ceremonies would be conducted to create the impression that some women had already achieved favored status. The emotional responses to these fabricated situations provided what court officials considered valuable insights into character and sexual history. The role of religious testing in the purity verification process reflected the deep integration of Islamic scholarship with imperial administrative practices. Potential concubines were required to demonstrate not only knowledge of basic religious principles but also specific types of spiritual purity that court officials believed could only be maintained through complete chastity. Religious scholars conducted detailed examinations of the women's understanding of Islamic law regarding sexual conduct, looking for gaps or inconsistencies that might indicate practical experience rather than theoretical knowledge. These religious examinations often focused on subtle theological questions about ritual purity, marriage law, and sexual ethics that required precise understanding of Islamic jurisprudence. Women who answered too knowledgeably about certain topics were suspected of having acquired their information through personal experience rather than scholarly instruction. Conversely, those who seemed ignorant of basic principles were deemed unsuitable for inclusion in the imperial household, creating a narrow range of acceptable responses that few candidates could navigate successfully. Handwriting analysis represented another pseudoscientific method employed in the comprehensive evaluation of potential concubines. Court officials believed that sexual experience would subtly alter a woman's handwriting, creating detectable changes in letter formation, spacing, or pressure that trained experts could identify. Potential concubines were required to copy religious texts, poetry, and personal letters, while specialists analyzed their penmanship for signs of moral corruption. The handwriting experts employed in this analysis claimed to possess ancient knowledge derived from Persian and Arab traditions of character assessment through calligraphic examination. They maintained elaborate charts correlating different writing characteristics with various personality traits and moral qualities, creating what they presented as scientific methods for detecting hidden aspects of character through penmanship analysis. Voice analysis testing required potential concubines to speak, sing, and recite poetry, while observers listened for subtle changes in tone, rhythm, or pronunciation that might indicate sexual experience. Court officials believed that intimate physical contact would permanently alter a woman's vocal characteristics, making voice analysis another diagnostic tool in their comprehensive testing arsenal. Women were required to perform various vocal exercises, while specialists noted every variation in pitch, timbre, or emotional expression. The vocal analysis experts were typically musicians or poets who claimed special sensitivity to the relationship between voice and character. They listened for what they called impurity resonance, supposedly detectable changes in vocal quality that resulted from sexual experience. Their evaluations were based on subjective impressions rather than objective measurements, creating another arbitrary standard that could eliminate candidates based on imperceptible differences in vocal performance. Reaction time testing involved presenting potential concubines with various stimuli while measuring their response speeds to different types of visual, auditory, or tactile input. Court physicians believed that sexual experience would alter neural pathways in ways that would affect reaction times to specific categories of stimulation. Women were subjected to batteries of tests involving flashing lights, sudden sounds, and unexpected physical contact, while observers recorded their response patterns. These reaction time measurements were conducted with primitive timing methods that provided questionable accuracy, but court officials treated the results as scientifically valid evidence of character and sexual history. Women whose responses fell outside predetermined ranges could find themselves eliminated from consideration, regardless of their performance in other aspects of the examination process. The cumulative psychological impact of these endless examinations created a state of learned helplessness among potential concubines that served imperial interests by producing compliant, dependent women who had been systematically stripped of agency and self-determination. The testing process itself became a form of conditioning that prepared successful candidates for lives of absolute submission to imperial authority. Memory testing required potential concubines to demonstrate perfect recall of complex instructions, lengthy poems, and detailed historical narratives, while under various forms of stress designed to reveal their true mental capabilities. Court officials believed that sexual experience would somehow impair cognitive function, making memory testing another method for detecting concealed impurity. Women were required to memorize and recite increasingly complex material, while subjected to distracting stimuli designed to test their concentration and mental discipline. The memory tests often involved religious or literary content that required not only accurate recollection, but also proper emotional expression during recitation. Women who seemed too comfortable with romantic poetry or who displayed inappropriate emotional responses to certain passages could be suspected of having personal experience with the situations described in the text they were required to memorize. Physical flexibility testing pushed potential concubines through demanding exercises designed to assess their bodily capabilities, while observers looked for signs that might indicate previous sexual activity. Court physicians maintained elaborate theories about how intimate physical contact would affect muscle tone, joint mobility, and overall physical conditioning in ways that trained evaluators could detect through careful observation. These flexibility tests often resembled yoga or dance routines that required extreme physical conditioning and considerable practice to perform successfully. Women who struggled with certain positions were sometimes suspected of physical limitations resulting from sexual experience, while those who performed too skillfully might be suspected of having acquired their abilities through inappropriate circumstances. The final arbitration process that determined which candidates would be accepted into imperial service involved a council of senior court officials, religious authorities, and experienced members of the imperial household who reviewed all testing results and made collective decisions about each woman's suitability. These deliberations could last for days and involved detailed analysis of every aspect of the examination process, creating comprehensive character profiles that would determine the course of entire lives. The Arbitration Council wielded absolute authority over their decisions, with no appeals process available to candidates who were rejected. Their deliberations were conducted in secret, with no explanation provided to unsuccessful applicants about the reasons for their elimination. This opacity served imperial interests by preventing potential concubines from learning to manipulate the testing system while maintaining the mystique of imperial judgment. As the sun sets over the Red Fort and the final evaluations are completed, the surviving candidates face a new reality that will reshape every aspect of their existence, transforming them from individuals with personal histories into imperial property whose every breath belongs to the shadow of God on earth. The moment of final selection arrived with the dawn call to prayer echoing across Delhi's minarets. You stand among the remaining 12 women from an original group of 60, your silk garments now feeling like burial shrouds as the weight of imperial judgment settles around you. The marble chamber where you wait has been transformed overnight into a ceremonial space, its walls draped with tapestries depicting the glory of Mughal conquest and the submission of defeated kingdoms. The message is unmistakable. Resistance is futile. Compliance is survival. Hakim Dara Shikoh, the emperor's eldest son and a man whose philosophical writings would later challenge orthodox Islamic thought, enters the chamber accompanied by the chief eunuch and 3 senior wives whose faces remain hidden behind jeweled veils. Their presence signals that this final stage of selection involves more than medical verification. It represents a complete transfer of ownership, a ritual transformation that will strip away whatever remains of your former identity and remake you according to imperial specifications. The women who have survived the testing process represent a carefully curated selection that reflects not just physical beauty and verified purity, but also psychological profiles deemed suitable for imperial service. Each has demonstrated the precise combination of intelligence and submissiveness that court officials believe will make them valuable additions to the zenana. Too much independence would threaten imperial control. Too little would make them useless for the complex social and political functions that concubines were expected to perform. The final ceremony begins with ritual purification that goes far beyond simple bathing. Each surviving candidate is immersed in water that has been blessed by the most respected Islamic scholars in the empire and infused with rose petals from gardens that have been cultivated exclusively for imperial use. The bath attendants, themselves former concubines who have earned positions of trust through years of loyal service, whisper prayers as they cleanse away what they consider the last traces of your former life. Your skin is then anointed with oils derived from sandalwood trees that grow only in the emperor's private forests, marking you with scents that will identify you as imperial property for the rest of your existence. The oils contain subtle perfumes that court physicians believe will enhance your attractiveness, while also serving as a form of chemical branding that cannot be removed or disguised. You will carry the scent of imperial ownership wherever you go. The haircutting ceremony that follows represents perhaps the most psychologically devastating aspect of the entire selection process. Court beauticians, working under the direct supervision of the emperor's personal grooming specialist, reshape your hair according to styles that have been specifically designed to reflect your new status within the imperial hierarchy. The cut hair is collected and burned in sacred fires, symbolically destroying your connection to your previous identity while ensuring that no trace of your former self can survive the transformation. Different hairstyles indicate different ranks within the concubine hierarchy, creating a visible system of status identification that will govern your interactions with other members of the zenana for years to come. Those selected as potential favorites receive elaborate styling that requires hours of daily maintenance. Others are given simpler cuts that reflect their designated roles as servants or entertainers. The hairstyle becomes a form of uniform that immediately communicates your place in the complex social structure of the imperial household. The assignment of new names follows an elaborate ceremony that involves consultation with court astrologers, religious authorities, and the emperor's personal advisors. Your birth name is formally recorded in documents that are immediately sealed and placed in imperial archives, where they will remain hidden until your death. The new identity you receive has been carefully crafted to reflect not only your physical characteristics, but also the role you are expected to play within the broader political and social dynamics of the court. Some names are chosen to honor deceased relatives of the imperial family, creating artificial kinship bonds that make loyalty to the dynasty seem like familial obligation. Others reflect particular virtues that the emperor wishes to emphasize, transforming personal identity into imperial propaganda. A few names are selected based on astrological calculations, designed to ensure that your destiny remains permanently aligned with imperial interests. Whatever your new name, it carries the weight of absolute ownership and complete subordination to imperial will. The clothing ceremony that follows reveals the extent to which every aspect of your appearance will now be controlled by imperial decree. The garments you receive have been specifically designed and manufactured for this ceremony, using fabrics that have never been worn by anyone else, and that will identify you as recently selected imperial property. The colors, patterns, and styling all carry coded meanings that will be understood by experienced members of the court while remaining invisible to outsiders. Your new wardrobe includes garments for every conceivable court function, from intimate private audiences with the emperor to elaborate public ceremonies where you might be displayed as evidence of imperial wealth and power. Each outfit has been tailored to your exact measurements, which were recorded during the medical examinations, creating clothing that fits your body so perfectly that wearing anything else would feel uncomfortable and foreign. The jewelry you receive carries even deeper significance than the clothing, as each piece has been specifically created to serve as both adornment and identification. The designs incorporate symbols that mark you as imperial property, while also indicating your rank within the concubine hierarchy and your designated role within the broader court structure. The metals used in your jewelry have been blessed by religious authorities and inscribed with verses from the Quran that are believed to ensure your continued loyalty and submission. Some pieces of jewelry serve practical functions beyond mere decoration. Certain rings contain hidden compartments that can hold perfumes, medicines, or other substances that might be needed during intimate encounters with the emperor. Anklets are designed with specific weight distributions that will affect your gait, creating a distinctive walk that identifies you as a member of the imperial harem, even when your face is hidden. Earrings incorporate tiny bells that will announce your presence wherever you go, making it impossible for you to move through the palace undetected. The final medical examination that concludes the selection process focuses less on verifying purity, which has already been established through the extensive testing procedures, and more on documenting your physical condition in detail that will allow court physicians to monitor any changes that might occur during your service. Every aspect of your body is measured, cataloged, and recorded in documents that will be updated regularly throughout your time as an imperial concubine. This final examination includes procedures designed to establish baseline measurements for your weight, muscle tone, skin condition, and overall health status. Court physicians create detailed charts that will be used to track changes in your physical condition that might indicate pregnancy, illness, or other developments that could affect your value to the imperial household. The examination results become part of your permanent record, available to court officials who need to make decisions about your care, treatment, or potential reassignment to different roles within the Zenana. The psychological evaluation that accompanies the final medical examination represents the culmination of months of observation and testing, designed to create a comprehensive profile of your mental state and emotional capabilities. Court officials have developed sophisticated methods for assessing personality traits that they consider relevant to your potential success as an imperial concubine, including your capacity for discretion, your ability to maintain emotional stability under pressure, and your likelihood of developing inappropriate attachments to other members of the court. The psychological profile that emerges from this evaluation will determine not only your immediate assignment within the Zenana, but also your long-term prospects for advancement within the imperial household. Those deemed emotionally stable and intellectually capable might eventually be selected for roles that involve managing other concubines or handling administrative responsibilities within the women's quarters. Others whose profiles suggest potential instability or independence might be assigned to purely decorative functions that minimize their opportunities for meaningful influence. The education program that begins immediately after your selection reflects the court's understanding that successful concubines must possess sophisticated knowledge of court etiquette, political dynamics, and cultural traditions that extend far beyond simple physical attractiveness. The curriculum has been developed over generations of imperial rule and represents one of the most comprehensive educational systems available to women in the Mughal Empire, albeit one designed primarily to serve imperial interests rather than personal development. Your studies will include intensive instruction in Persian and Arabic literature, with particular emphasis on poetry and religious texts that are favored by the imperial family. You will learn to read and write in multiple scripts, enabling you to participate in the elaborate correspondence networks that connect the imperial court with provincial governors, foreign diplomats, and religious authorities throughout the Islamic world. This linguistic education serves practical purposes by making you useful as a translator or scribe, while also demonstrating the cultural sophistication that the court considers essential for its female members. Musical training represents another crucial component of your education, as the ability to perform vocal and instrumental music is considered essential for entertaining the emperor during private audiences. The musical instruction you receive will focus on repertoires that have been specifically selected for their appropriateness to intimate court settings, including classical Persian songs, devotional Islamic music, and regional folk traditions that reflect the cultural diversity of the Mughal Empire. Your musical education will also include training in dance forms that are considered suitable for private performance, though these lessons will be conducted under strict supervision to ensure that your movements remain within bounds deemed appropriate for imperial concubines. The art of conversation receives particular attention in your educational program, as court officials understand that the emperor values intellectual companionship as much as physical beauty. You will be trained in topics of discussion that are considered suitable for intimate audiences, including poetry, philosophy, history, and religious scholarship. More importantly, you will learn the subtle arts of listening, questioning, and responding, that can make conversation engaging without crossing boundaries that might threaten imperial authority or reveal inappropriate knowledge about court politics. Your training in household management reflects the practical reality that successful concubines often assume administrative responsibilities within the zenana that require sophisticated organizational and leadership skills. You will learn to manage servants, oversee domestic budgets, coordinate elaborate ceremonies, and handle the complex logistics involved in maintaining the imperial household. These skills will prove valuable regardless of your ultimate position within the concubine hierarchy, as even those assigned to purely decorative roles must understand how the imperial household functions if they hope to survive and prosper within its complex social structure. The religious education you receive serves multiple purposes beyond simple spiritual instruction, as court officials understand that demonstrating proper Islamic devotion is essential for maintaining legitimacy within the broader Muslim community that supports Mughal rule. You will memorize extensive passages from the Quran, learn the proper procedures for various forms of prayer and ritual observance, and study the religious law that governs personal conduct within Islamic society. This religious knowledge will be tested regularly throughout your service, as any sign of theological ignorance or spiritual laxity could result in the loss of imperial favor. Your instruction in court etiquette represents perhaps the most complex and demanding aspect of your educational program, as the Mughal court has developed elaborate protocols that govern every conceivable social interaction. You must learn not only how to behave in the emperor's presence, but also how to navigate the intricate hierarchies that exist among the various members of the imperial household. A single breach of etiquette could result in punishment, demotion, or expulsion from the court, making this knowledge literally a matter of survival. The medical training you receive reflects the court's expectation that concubines will serve as informal healthcare providers within the zenana, particularly for issues related to women's health and reproductive medicine. You will learn to prepare traditional remedies for common ailments, assist with childbirth and infant care, and recognize symptoms of diseases that might threaten the health of the imperial household. This medical knowledge serves practical purposes while also making you more valuable to the court by expanding the range of services you can provide. Your education in political awareness requires delicate balance, as you must understand enough about imperial policy and court dynamics to serve effectively as the emperor's companion, while avoiding knowledge that might make you dangerous to imperial security. You will learn about the history of the Mughal dynasty, the current structure of the empire's administration, and the basic principles that guide imperial decision-making. However, your instruction will carefully avoid sensitive information about military strategies, diplomatic negotiations, or succession planning that could be used against imperial interests if you were ever to fall from favor. The psychological conditioning that accompanies your formal education represents the most insidious aspect of the entire preparation process, as it is designed to reshape your personality and emotional responses in ways that will make rebellion against imperial authority literally unthinkable. Through carefully orchestrated experiences of reward and punishment, praise and criticism, inclusion and exclusion, court officials will gradually mold your psychological responses until serving the emperor becomes not just your duty, but your deepest desire. This conditioning process utilizes sophisticated understanding of human psychology that has been developed through centuries of imperial experience in managing large populations of servants, soldiers, and administrators. The techniques employed are designed to create emotional dependency on imperial approval, while simultaneously eliminating attachments to anything or anyone outside the imperial household. By the time your preparation is complete, the emperor's favor will have become the only source of meaning and purpose in your existence. The final ceremony that concludes your preparation and formally inducts you into imperial service takes place in the most sacred chamber of the zenana, surrounded by relics that connect the Mughal dynasty to the Prophet Muhammad and the early Islamic community. The ceremony combines elements of religious ritual, legal contract, and magical transformation, creating an experience that is designed to be so overwhelming that it permanently alters your understanding of your place in the world. As dawn breaks over the Red Fort and the ceremony begins, you kneel before representatives of absolute power who will now determine every aspect of your future existence. The girl who entered these chambers months ago no longer exists. In her place kneels a carefully crafted imperial artifact, beautiful and compliant and utterly dependent on the will of the shadow of God on earth. Your transformation is complete, but your story as an imperial concubine is just beginning. The weight of silk against your skin feels different now, heavier somehow, as if the fabric itself carries the burden of your new identity. Around you, the other surviving candidates kneel in identical positions of submission, their faces reflecting the same mixture of terror and resignation that you feel coursing through your own veins. The morning light filtering through carved marble screens illuminates a scene that has been repeated countless times throughout the history of the Mughal Empire, yet feels utterly unique and devastating to each woman experiencing it for the first time. The chief eunuch approaches with a silver tray bearing small crystal vials, each containing what appears to be clear liquid that catches the morning light like captured tears. These are the final drops that will seal your transformation, a concoction prepared by the court's most trusted physicians using ingredients whose names you'll never know, and whose effects will bind you to the imperial household in ways that transcend simple legal ownership. The liquid tastes of roses and something metallic, something that makes your tongue tingle and your vision sharpen with unnatural clarity. Within minutes, you feel the substance working through your system, creating sensations you've never experienced before. Your heartbeat becomes audible in your ears, your skin grows hypersensitive to the slightest touch, and most disturbing of all, you find yourself overwhelmed with an inexplicable sense of gratitude toward the figures who stand watching your final moments of transformation. The court physicians have spent generations perfecting this chemical manipulation of human emotion, creating dependencies that make rebellion not just impossible, but literally inconceivable. The tray is passed to each kneeling woman in turn, and you watch as the same glazed expression of artificial contentment spreads across their faces. Some of these women were your companions during the testing process, sharing whispered fears and desperate hopes during the brief moments when you were left unguarded. Now they look at you with the blank serenity of strangers, their personalities already beginning to dissolve under the influence of substances designed to remake human consciousness according to imperial specifications. Hakim Darashiko begins reciting verses from a text you don't recognize, though the Arabic words seem to penetrate your consciousness with unusual force and clarity. The chemical enhancement of your senses makes every syllable feel like a physical presence, carving meanings into your mind that you understand on levels deeper than rational thought. These are not ordinary religious passages, but specially crafted psychological triggers that will activate whenever you hear similar phrases throughout your service, creating conditioned responses that will ensure your continued compliance. The eldest of the veiled women steps forward, carrying a leather-bound ledger that contains what you gradually realize are the terms of your new existence. The document is read aloud in Persian, though your altered state of consciousness allows you to understand every word despite your limited knowledge of the language. You are no longer a person with rights or legal standing. You are property of the imperial household, valued and cataloged like any other asset, subject to reassignment, loan, or disposal according to the emperor's will. The parchment crackles as the final signatures are inscribed, sealing fates that were decided long before these women ever glimpsed the marble corridors of the Red Fort. The Mughal system of testing concubines for purity reveals itself not as medical procedure or religious devotion, but as something far more sinister. A comprehensive machinery of control that transformed human beings into imperial commodities through methods that combined primitive science, psychological manipulation, and absolute power, exercised without mercy or accountability. These elaborate rituals of verification served purposes that extended far beyond ensuring virginity. They represented the systematic destruction of individual identity, the calculated breaking of human will, and the transformation of young women into compliant instruments of imperial pleasure. The testing process itself became a form of conditioning that prepared its survivors for lives of absolute submission, while eliminating those who might retain enough independence to threaten the established order. History remembers the Mughal Empire for its architectural marvels, its cultural achievements, and its administrative innovations. But buried within the archives of the Red Fort lie darker truths about the human cost of absolute power. and the lengths to which those who wield it will go to maintain control over the most intimate aspects of human existence. The women who survived these testing procedures paid for their survival with their identities, their autonomy, and ultimately their humanity, becoming beautiful ghosts haunting the corridors of a civilization that history chooses to remember for its glory rather than its cruelties. The echoes of their experiences remind us that behind every monument to imperial greatness lie countless stories of individual suffering, and that the true measure of any civilization lies not in the palaces it builds, but in how it treats the most vulnerable members of society. Today, as you walk through the preserved halls of the Red Fort or gaze upon the ethereal beauty of the Taj Mahal, remember that these stones were mortared with the tears of women whose names were erased, whose identities were stolen, and whose humanity was sacrificed on the altar of imperial ambition.